Okay. Hello, everyone. Hopefully my voice is loud and clear. I will be using a notepad for this episode, so people can look at the video, the screen of the video, and really, I had this 40-hour drive, not 40-hour, 40-minute drive, and I began wondering about, the human position, and for how long will a species be able to keep its natural humanhood as it extends and expands forth into the future. Now, I consider that in the future, the scenario of human psychology is going to be very different. If we were to consider an advanced civilization would be the most advanced. Like, it would be a civilization filled with advanced beings, okay? Now, if we were to wonder about what is the most advanced being, this is where the title of this episode becomes relevant. Today, it's actually, for me, it was a bit of an inner life-changing day, I got a huge realization, huge insight on just my own life, irrelevant of the topic of this episode. Just today, it was a heavy moment. But anyways, let me bring this notepad. Okay. So, if viewers look at the screen, they should be able to see. Okay. Minds. Minds that were never just minds. What is a mind? How does a mind know it's a mind? What is beyond the mind? Or I should say, my fascination for the title of today's episode, it extends from, I would say, I can compartmentalize it into these three questions. The answer to these three questions would get us into a mindset or here, let me, I'll get to this point I'm writing. And keep in mind, guys, in this episode, because I'm writing, pretty much the pace of the episode is going to be different. I've tried it, I've tried writing and talking at the same time, but if I do it for too long, then it becomes like, it's kind of like, speech is fast-paced, writing is slow. Writing is like, a painter's, creating a masterpiece. But I would say speech is more like, like a general marching in the battlefield. What I'm trying to say is that communication has different speed in regards to how quick the events of a sort of narrative change. Okay. When I'm saying minds that were never just minds, I'm saying, okay, so let's say I shouldn't say let's say, right now we're living at a time in history where human beings are saying, I have a mind, my neighbor has a mind, my government, the politicians I work for have a mind. He says everybody has a mind, but on some level, what is a mind, or what is the mind? Now, the incredible thing about this is that somehow when it came to this question, what is the mind, in ancient cultures, they had a very open, multidimensional perspective. It's as if before superstition became superstition, and a human being was wondering about the multidimensional workings of an edgeless world. The multidimensional function of an edgeless world, a world that in some sense the edge can't be seen. It's like if we were to consider the sky, we'd be like the edge of the sky is the edge of the world. But also the edge of our eyes are also being an edge of the sky, right? Now the idea is that if the edge of the outer sky is unknown, it's also like the inner connection point. It's like the inner edge of the sky is unseeable to its unknown. It's like what we're calling, let's say the glory of human advancement is actually taking place between two dimensions that can't be fully known. We can't completely know the outer realms, too big. Too big, and it's also changing, kind of an impossible scenario. When it comes to the inner realms, as the Upanishads say, the seer of the seen is unseen. It's like a human being, who's like, oh man, what is this universe? I can't see its end, and in some sense I can't see its beginning. But in some sense I will see my end and my beginning and my end, right? What I'm trying to say is that we are living inside a giant question mark. And I don't mean like a giant spaceship that inside it is simulating worlds with shaped like a question mark. Imagine human species has to create some sort of mothership, in the future, and the mothership is just going to look like a question mark, will be like, But anyways, What I'm trying to say is that we can't get to the end of the outer world. We can't see the end of we can't see the end of what is in front of our eyes, and we can't see the one that is looking through our eyes. Now, these two are access points to dehumanization, right? But these aren't if I was to explain okay, here I'll go to it. So, I guess these three questions, we wonder about them. Sorry guys, this is from something else. Okay. So guys, that page is a bit, I'll move on to the next thing I'm saying, right? I wanted to add a further point to the previous page, but I guess I'll just keep going, In this episode, I would say there could be a possibility that the speaker is tired. But we'll see how energizing the content is, People don't realize when I give these talks, I'm also listening to the talks. I'm also expecting, But anyways, here. So, pretty much, we have a human being, okay? And here, I'll put human. And now, this human being, I would say, its intelligence is divided in three categories. Now, consider these if you're passionate as dimensions, but it is up to you. Every person is choosing how much of their inner realms moves in the outer realms. So I'm not saying this as if this is like what I'm explaining is an absolutist truth. I am saying, hey, species, what are the possibilities? What are the probabilities? What are all the ways that civilization 1.0 can in some sense advance? Civilization 2.0 emerges, right? It's pretty much, it's like, what do human beings deserve? And based on the interpretation we have on the human idea, all of this comes, into focus. I would say, this is, okay, I'll give it a try and then I'll explain, how modernity also approaches it. Pretty much we have the human being. The human being divides into a dimension of body focus, it experiences a dimension which we say mind focused, and a dimension, is this on mute? Okay. And we have a dimension, I'll call it unknown focused, okay? Or here, I'll say traditional term we use for it is the soul. Now, when it comes to the focus of the body, objects define reality. When it comes to the mind, subjects define defined reality. And something the human species doesn't know but will soon realize is that the mind is not like the bot in front of our eyes. Let's say I'm looking at a cup of coffee, right? And that is, let's say, 4 out of 4 dimensions real. And I would say imagination is 3 out of 4 dimensions real. Right? And it can be a sort of, how can I tell you? It's like we are reaching there. The era of advanced communication has begun since 2020. I declared it. But in some sense, the idea is that as human beings become more intelligent, this intelligence in some sense shifts the context of their meaning. Now, the context of meaning for the human being is kept in the duality of language, but if we were to wonder about, okay, where does it go beyond the duality of language? Are we destined to be subjects moving objects, and for the object to realize, oh my God, it's as if like an object and a subject are tag teaming, and so the Buddhists are believing in reincarnation, you know? Like a sort of tag team wrestling game. Imagine it's like, you know, the subject, it's like, let me in, you know, it's like the person's mind moves first, then their body. Or in some sense, when it comes to the body, I would say, I mean, honestly, materialism is how objects are here before subjects. Immaterialism is how, let's say, subjects are here before objects. But when we realize the subject and object are codependent, that means true spirituality is beyond language. And strangely, the relationship that the human species has with you look at the New Age community, what do you find? You know, you find glorification of, how would I say it? I'm trying to say that it's like the world is a multidimensional system, okay? So many different human beings have come and gone, and so many human beings will be born, okay? And while the human being is alive, it is experiencing a cosmic event, you know? And in some sense, the relationship of the individual activity with the cosmic activity. You know, it's like if we were wondering, out of all the species of animals that there are on this planet, of species of creatures, it's like which creature has looked at the stars, you know, it's like wolves howl at the moon, but they don't want to go plant a flag there, you know? Similarly, it's like I'm trying to say, like the human species, not similar, but the human species has a capability of interacting with unknown dimensions of let's say, life. And in these unknown dimensions, you know, if the creature was a definition of their environment, that means it's the more we take an evolutionary biological perspective, the more the mind of the creature was defined by its environment. But nowadays, if you look at human beings and you wonder what happened to this creature that was being defined by the environment, it managed to step out of the environment, it managed to notice the environment separate to itself, and then it managed to create an environment inside the environment. It's like the movie Inception, a dream inside a dream. In the dream of like nature, we built let's say the first attempt of our ancestors, a sort of unnatural civilization, right? It's as if, you know, no creature on this earth, you know, it's like before man had really cared, right, to in some sense establish a global identity with the planet. Right, there could be a person who's like, I'm from this nation, and you know, I wear this jersey of identification, you know. But at the same time, you begin to see it's just a bunch of creatures on a rock spinning around itself. Right, like the bizarreness of the cosmological circumstance is like our biggest motivation to try to wonder about, okay, what is the truth? Like if there is truth you can say is in some sense the clear experience of all accessible, available dimensions. Right? When I talk about an advanced communicator, I'm not saying a human being who just believes in themselves. Like the advanced communicator is actually a space. right? It's the era when, I would say in some sense the advanced communicators are like the cabin crew of spaceship Earth, and the pilots of consciousness are in some sense its pilots. It's like they're beings right now on this Earth who their purpose is to in some sense be like a cabin crew inside the spaceship, go fix what's good with the problems internally in regards to the mind of the species. You see, guys, what I'm doing is that I am taking the individual archetype, right? So for example, human beings, they saw a king back in the day, and imagine a human being wondered about, hey, does the universe have a king? Now I am in some sense taking this idea of like the individual human, and I am in some sense wondering if, let's say 8 billion human beings, they somehow manage to tap into some next level organized rhythm. That means imagine the universe was a organism, and we are all the cells inside the body of the organism, and the cells act in accordance to their nature, right? So I'm saying, imagine suddenly there was some strange, kind of synchronized, incredibly efficient kind of advancement of humanity. That means imagine somehow that everybody on the planet cared for how they were being a member of a species. Okay, now the Kant's idea of the species, which is the sum total karma of the species, of all human beings, of every human being. So in some sense, sorry guys, there was an interruption. I am saying that if there was a collective human scenario, okay, or let me say it this way, being alive as a human being bears with it a responsibility in which if animals talk, they would all be disciples of the human species. If they had capacity for personality. Life is strangely like an artwork, where it's like oxygen is the paint, and DNA is the paintbrush, and history is the canvas. I guess mortality is inspiring as well. Everything's inspirational, the person's like, I need motivation, and the yogi, the mystic shouted, it's like, open your eyes, it's all everywhere. Back to what I'm drawing here, I guess. There's a dimension of the body, a dimension of objects define reality, we have the dimension of the mind. You know, the human being can become mind focused, and this is when subjects define reality. And then, oh my god. Okay, it went to a different tab anyways. And when it comes to the subject, the soul when it comes to the soul focus, this is in some sense, I guess, the unknown being its own instantaneous revelation. So, in other words, when I say minds that were never just minds, I am saying that Civilization 1.0 is obsessed with this, right? But I'm saying in an advanced civilization, you know, I'm suggesting my own strategy for it called Civilization 2.0. And so I would say that would equate all dimensions, right? So pretty much I'm saying, let's say a person says, I'm just a body, right? What is the possibilities of the body? Okay, the body existence, and then non-existence. Pretty much the body seems to be like, that is the choice it has, okay? When it comes to the mind, I would say we have in some sense consciousness, and we have the unconscious. Now, if we are to, let's say, if we are, this is so far, let's say, cultural consciousness, that means what is in the awareness of, you know, the societies of mankind and their behavior. Now, I would say when it comes to the unconscious, when you go down here, this is when I would say it's a consideration of a mysterious source of movement before the body and mind can move. Now this is very important, right? Because, you know, sure, there's the lovey-dovey spirituality, which is kind of like holding hands, sing kumbaya, and you know, pray like your God. But then there is, I would say, beyond the storylines, beyond the attraction of the implication of an ideological construct. You see, when somebody says there's a potential of a world here beyond language, it's another way of saying there's a presence of an intelligence that was never a character in a story. And so the religious perspective, you're a character in a story. You know, the secular perspective, you're still a character in a story. It's just a story where there's more freedom in it. You know, everything is really a story. Human beings, what is the personality? It's as if, you know, it's like, tell me your story, you know. So, from this dimension, okay, that right now in 2022, what's going on? We're like, okay, people are alive, and what that means is the idea, there are, again, subjective, pre-structured subjectivity before objective movement can be considered conscious. You know what it is? It's as if something is happening before the human being moves, but it's happening in a different dimension. It's happening like the mind seems to be like, you know, like a person can visualize something. Let's say I'm going to tell the viewers, okay, visualize, for example, you know, a spaceship shaped like a crescent moon. In the future, like, you know, let's say 1,000 years from now, like a crescent moon spaceship filled with human beings living in it is like, let's say, floating in space. Like the people, the listeners can imagine that, right? Like anybody can visualize that. But now if I ask you, where did your visualization happen? This is where you can tell those who are philosophers and those who are not, right? Where those who are not philosophically, those who don't have the courage to allow their subjective position to change, it's as if you how would I tell you, it's like there's something real happening on the planet, and then there's real human beings on the planet, but the way these real human beings are experiencing the real is technically in an unreal way, right? It's as if I've seen, for example, atheists, you know, crush the spirit of, for example, theists in these debates you see on YouTube. And for a second, I was just waiting to see when there would come this sort of rebuttal where it's as if like, who is that self that is denying or accepting? The species has been afraid of the inconceivable. That's the issue. And if there's a way that intelligence is being inconceivably, and when I say inconceivable, it's too instantaneous to be measured. You know, that means it's like, in order for there to be a measurement of anything, there has to be a sort of change, right? But if you find like an instantaneous truth, the person is like, man, I don't know if I should believe in space or not. It's like, is space real? Like we know that there's something, it seems like there's something, you know, between objects, but what is it? You know, like how mind-blowing is it that, for example, from the, let's say, from the religious creeds, you know, it's like God is a bizarre belief, you know, let's say from someone outside of religion, and for the secular, I would say for the scientists, it's like space is a belief. The person's like, how can I believe in space when there is nothing there? How can the human mind conceive of nothing, right? It's as if like, do you know, it's as if I think on some level, you know, dark matter and dark energy, before there could be scientific, you know, advancements in it, it's like they need to get a bunch of, you know, philosophers and advanced communicators to look at it. The idea is that which is believing in phenomena is acting like a subject, but before the subject can act, or before the ego or let's say simulated persona can claim anything, right? It is, in some sense, it knows it is unknown. You see, this is the thing. This is, I would say, the true fear of the egoic entity. The true fear of the egoic entity is when it realizes it is not God. Okay? This is the biggest fear of, let's say, a mind that is creating its own universe. Imagine you have created a world and you've thought that you're the creator. Or I would say something bizarre. Imagine, let's say you drew a painting, let's say you're an artist, you drew something, and you thought that this was your artwork. Suddenly you begin to realize that it was never your artwork, that the whole cosmic existence belonged to a mystery beyond verbs and nouns. Do you know what I'm saying? Right, so this is where it gets to dehumanization. Right now, we are so philosophically disinterested in trying to understand what the mind is in 2022 that I would say it's kind of like hilarious. You know, it's like we're actors that don't know our role because we don't know what we were cast for, right? Imagine they ask, like, you know, someone super successful, how do you become successful, right? And imagine they say, I cried at my misery until I got bored of not seeing the greater. Not wanting to see the greater. You know, it's hilarious. From one angle, I find myself to be nobody, but from another angle, I find myself to be an 4.5 billion-year-old evolutionary creature in which, through the recent acquisition of language, a sort of dualistic sub-universe has been projected over the, let's say, the physical realm. And so in some sense, it's like the bizarreness of minds realizing they were never just minds is another way of saying that this beyond this, it's like for the first time the species has to consider beyond its subjective life. Now this is where the two types of dehumanization can be explained. Okay, so pretty much so far I've kind of given a display of the dimensions to the human being. And pretty much we can move as an object, we can move as a subject, right? And we can also move subjects. And also there's this strange thing called, you know, primordial awareness. In certain ancient mystical traditions they write about it, that, like, for example, in Vedic thought it is para-Brahman. It's like how truth is everywhere. And I'll say that again because the sentence can be heard in two ways, as if truth is all around, or in some sense truth is being everywhere. You know, it's sometimes I feel like, could human life be like an, you know, the result of a field of activity in another dimension? You know, we have this notion that human bodies are only alive, right? But what if space was alive, right? Imagine if space was alive and it had a voice and somebody just walks into a room and the room says, hey man, you know, it's like, you know, who told you you can come inside, you know? And the person's like, where's this sound coming from? And then they realize the room is alive. The moment is being, and then intelligence sculpts itself as a communicator, as an individual conscious entity in a collective position. To be a human being is another way of saying that you have accessed not only a cyclical reality, but a cyclical reality where the free will, and you can say some sort, like, you know what it is? It's as if imagine your future self wanted to test, right? Like usually time travel movies, what do we see? The future self comes and says, hey guys, you know, don't mess around, right? The time traveler goes back and the future is saved, for example, right? But imagine now, if from the future they wanted to see which past selves, imagine a group of time travelers from the future, they wanted to see which past selves in which parallel universes of Earth are worthy, right? As if they're going through, imagine the future is screening the past through the presence and through the presence of karma. And imagine the future was in a position where, I mean, sure, as a biological entity, when I think about the future, I'm like, woohoo, you know? I'm like, yay, the species is gonna, excuse my language, but the species is gonna have sex all over the universe. That's the destiny of the biological entity. We overpopulate the cosmos, and we're like, what else is left? That, the graceful human touch, needs to be directed towards. So I'm pretty much telling you the human species physically is in some sense an infinite game of manifestations, maintenance. It's as if like the biological body is in some sense, poetic thought is in the domain of the god Vishnu. The domain of the god Vishnu is an archetype for that which is maintaining the universe. So it's as if the body is like Vishnu's, the god Vishnu's responsibility. And then let's say we wondered about the mind, whose responsibility is the mind. And I would say the mind's responsibility is Brahman. Or sorry, I should say the mind's responsibility, or I'm messing this up, guys. There's a better way I can say it. So a quick reset of this Vishnu association. I'll say to mind body. I'll say this. Okay, imagine the body is in the domain of, let's say, the god Shiva. The god Shiva is an archetype of destruction. So everybody on some level knows, sure, we can keep the biological human game and attempt to universalize it, galacticize it, and then universalize it, and then based on how we see life, maybe multiversalize it. Imagine in the future there's a religion called multiversalism. Imagine they asked, somebody who believes in multiversalism, okay, which is another way of saying a sort of realistic approach to parallel universalism. So imagine they asked the multiversalist, right, do you believe in God? And the multiversalist was like, I don't know, let's say 722 dimensions, 722 parallel selves in this moment agree, and then let's say, like, I don't know, maybe let's say, I don't know, some other amount disagree. The idea I'm trying to say is that the expansion of life is based on how you hold the context. So it's like whoever you are, most people, let's say somebody is mentally suffering, or somebody has some sorrow or sadness. Okay, here, I'll say the example like this. Imagine you're a sad person. Here, I'll draw it. So let's say we have sad person inside a sad world. We have a sad person inside a happy world. We have a, let's say, happy person inside a sad world. And then we have, in some sense, a happy person inside a happy world. So there's technically, 4 ways, or for a sad person, there's 2 kinds of sadness, right? Sadness in a sad world, sadness in a happy world. Sorry guys, the reason I'm coughing is because I have to position, one of the reasons I'm coughing is because I have to position the notepad and the laptop, so I'm trying to have the microphone of the laptop be close to me, but I'm also trying to have my notepad not fall from the table. So I'm a bit, what do you call it, like, I'm leaning a bit forward, and so, like, the coughs are a bit. Anyways, I'm explaining my coughs. True philosophy. A person in a sad world, a sad person, let's say, in a sad world, is another way of saying hopelessness. Sorry guys, the screen changed while I was explaining. So the sad person in a sad world, this is when I would say life is meaningless. Sad person in a happy world, this is a depressed person. Let's say depressed, and let's say the first one is hopeless. Because there's levels of the inner realms, like some sages would say, it's like heaven and hell are not locations, they're states of mind. And so if there's somebody goes into a state where they're identifying as a sad person in a sad world, so in some sense it's like hopelessness. It's as if, like, even if the person tries to become happy, the world is a sad place. So hopelessness, sad person in a happy world, depressed. And why is it depressed? Because the sad person sees what it is missing out on, or something it is not participating in those dimensions of being activity, right? So let's say that's depression. We have a happy person in a sad world. This is motivation, I guess, but on some level I'd say a happy person in a sad world is in some sense a hopeful person. And then we have a happy person in a happy world, and this is a great person. Right? Now, civilization 1.0 is somewhere functioning around here, okay? This is like the current, when I say civilization 1.0, I mean the current civilization. So this is like Civ 1.0, or here. Now this, guys, this is the advanced civilization. This is where So, Civilization 2.0 is the activation of the greatness of not just human beings, the greatness of the universal sector. You see, back in the day, I don't talk about magic and too much of that esotericism because I feel those who, how can I tell you, it's like we're living at a time where spirituality has become theater. It's like the spirituality beyond stories is in some sense the mystical activation. And a person becomes a mystic when they experience and such an unknown variable in their moment that they cannot avoid it. You see, it's as if there was this mystic by the name of Sadhguru. He says it's as if you get a glimpse of the divine, right? What is the divine? For most people, it was like how miracles happened. And what are miracles? An unknown interference, in an expected known outcome. And the question comes, what is the advantage of happy people in a happy world? And technically we can wonder about both of them. We can wonder about the sad person in a sad world, extinction. It's just too sad. Being sad. Sad person in a happy world, the sad person becomes humbled, right? So those who are depressed, they suddenly think about how their ancestors, didn't have beds, and they suddenly, through gratefulness, they readjust their unworthiness of their inner life in regards to self-archetypal simulation, and in some sense they allow the world's worthiness to show them their own worthiness. You see, on who was it? I think it was Ram Dass, where he said we're all guiding each other home, and to be honest, it's as if we're all advancing together as a species. It doesn't matter. That means here's the hilarious thing: as a species, we should even perhaps abandon the idea of intelligent being smart and stupid. Like, imagine there comes a time where that conceptually doesn't make sense anymore, because there's such collective identification that if one, just think about it, that means this is the type of Mr.Within in advanced civilization I'm suggesting, right? A civilization that is so advanced that if a single member is in some sense not advancing, the advanced civilization will not consider itself an advanced civilization, a greater momentum will go into advancing, right? You see, there's this concept, okay, for example, the word music, it comes from, I believe, ancient Greek, in some sense, the word muses, right? M-U-S-E-S, right? And the word muses brought forth the concept of the muse, and the concept of the muse from, of course, Heraclitus, for him, it was kind of like the logos, right? But I would say the concept of the muse, in regards to music, it's as if like it's an interaction with another world. All those people who are super creative people, they have somehow in their life had the faith to make certain decisions that has unlocked that perception, right? Because on some level, the moment we have a free will, it's another way of saying, the moment we consider free will, it's like another way of saying everybody is starting from a neutrality to decision making. That means, let's say you have person A and person B, and they're completely different people, okay? But when it comes to both of them having to make a decision, whether they're like apples or oranges, before they make a decision, right, they both have the same equivalent freedom, right? Because if the mind is space, it means our relationship as an object is on a sort of mysterious thin ice. It's as if there could be a chance that in the future generations, like some of the wisest people in the educational system would be like, all right, guys, We have found the edge of knowledge. Imagine in the future there's this huge ceremony and like, let's say the most educated people on the planet, they've all agreed to a conclusion. And they're making a global announcement, right? And imagine the whole world's watching, right? And the most intellectual, like incredible minded people. And so, imagine they say, that the ultimate education is giving the educational system is giving its last teaching as a student, to a student, right? That means the educational system, imagine, says that we're shifting to this mentality that before we know anything, we don't know anything. That means the educational system, imagine, apologizes to the species and like imagine, I'm saying in the future, the sort of, let's say, major global, influencer of all educational systems on the planet. What I'm trying to say is that we give people a permission not to be shackled to ideas from the past, but to realize that when they are present in this universe, there is a creative dimension, there is a work that needs to be done. Right? The alchemists called it the great work. They identified it with how lead would turn into gold. Some people say that's nonsense, but I'll tell you, in like ancient Persian culture, it's like the idea is alive. And so the alchemists, after turning lead into gold, realized that when lead turns into gold, it's like the element would complete all its composition, and it's like the substance would completely change into gold. It didn't have the illusion of gold. It transformed into complete gold. Imagine an alchemist putting some potion on lead and it becomes gold, for example. Now the alchemists had a spiritual side, right? Had a metaphysical approach. And in their metaphysical approach, they saw this metaphor of lead turning into gold, an all-out or in-out transformation. And so they saw it that in some sense, what lead turning into gold is equivalent to, it's like a human being completing or activating their ultimate action as a being, right? Imagine it's as if like, there was a yogi that, let's say there was a disciple, this disciple yogi, and there was this like, let's say yogi guru, okay, enlightened guru. And imagine this enlightened guru comes and tells the disciple, as if like the cosmos, the intuition of the cosmos has told me, that this is your last lifetime in manifestation, and in some sense, you will automatically mahasamadhi, right? And so this person is shocked. This enlightened guru is telling him in some sense as if he is already enlightened, he's already free. Right? Imagine someone searching for freedom and then, somebody coming to you and saying you're already free, it's already given, right? So now imagine this disciple from the state of complete freedom is wondering about the meaning of reality. And the answer is strangely, the creative dimension. The purpose of what the body is to move. The purpose of the mind is to, in some sense, novelty. And novelty is like exploration and understanding at the same time. It's as if the educational system allows human beings their birthright to be explorers of an unknown world. This is not being motivated. Students that get good grades. I sometimes wonder how the teacher looks. The teacher's like, good job, kid. You memorize the past and repeat it to me in a way that a robot could. So it's as if you get this, abstract symbol as your grade, And so imagine there's a teacher waiting to see which student is awake, which student has noticed the samsara of the concept, We have to create a world where people can start like this. It's like you either start by honoring yourself, you either start by honoring others, or you either start by honoring the world. The purest path is honoring the world. Then the second path is honoring the self. And I would say in some sense, honoring others is like how, the child's reliance on other forces of intelligence to administer it go away, and now the person is wondering about the fractalization of the context of meaning. Do you know what that means? That means it's like you thought you were just a human being on a rock, and you saw that in the inner realms the mind has a capacity to not only endlessly add dimensions as long as it's energetically powered. Do you know? It's as if like the solar powered imagination, its purpose is information. It's as if the person's like, why do I have a biological body receiving the sensory realm, right? Like, why is there sensory perception being received by the body? Like, why does the body, want light? That's pretty much what the design of the eyes say. That something in evolution wanted to see the world and then see itself and then see the world and the self beyond it, whatever it is. You see, that's the power of the unknown. The unknown is the guardian angel, I would tell you, of original knowledge. And original knowledge means duality has become a student of a singularity that in its acceptance of its singularity has understood it's all being held by the void. And when there is an unknown viewer of emptiness, that is when in some sense the greater dimensions open. Okay, it's as if it's like imagine if the sensory perception was a curtain. Okay, our five senses was like a curtain veiling us from the true nature of reality. It's as if beyond this veil, it's as if like, here, how would I tell you? It's like there's a singular physical veil, right? There's a dualistic mental curtain veil, right? And there's in some sense something which is, it's like after you pull the curtain of your mind, that is when dehumanized relationship with that's when dehumanization settles in and the person realizes that the attention that is being the moment is not just from here. That's supposed to say dehumanization. Okay. So, two types of dehumanization, guys. Dehumanization in the inner realms. So guys, I'll just read what I'm writing in case you can't read my handwriting. So 2 types of dehumanization. Dehumanization of the inner realms. That's how a mind notices the witness is not bound to the human archetype. Okay, that's a kind of dehumanization. Dehumanization means non-human domain of awareness. Pretty much think of it this way. There's dehumanization for the mind, there's dehumanization for the body. Now we have dehumanization of the outer realms, or in the outer realms. And I'll give you examples for this, okay? So what dehumanization in the outer realms means, it's pretty much this question of sorry, I forgot a word here. How long, sorry. There was no issue. Unnecessary tripping. So anyways, now what does this mean? Again, I would say dehumanization for the body, examples would be, for example, aliens, humanoid, non-humanoid. Then we have, for example, androids, which are machine entities, just like, again, humanized, humanoid or non-humanoid. Then we have, for example, clones in the future. Let's say, that becomes a sort of example of, I mean, a clone is very strange. A clone is like, externally human, internally non-human. I'm writing too much, guys, there's no space. So, there's more example, guys. There's like the era of talking animals. Over here, even better yet. We have clones, we have lesser animals. Or here, I'll just put wildlife. Wildlife is dehumanized, like we all understood that from the Tarzan movie. It's like, who who was it? Like this like next level motivational speaker on YouTube. He's like, show me your 6 friends, 6 closest friends, and I'll tell you what kind of person you become. Right? And imagine Tarzan was listening to this, and his 6 closest friends were like gorillas. Imagine this is somehow, or let's say, sure, Jane should 100% be one of them. But I'm saying, like, do you know what I'm saying? It's when the human personality no longer has a reason to animate as the human archetype. That's what dehumanization means, guys. Dehumanization is a threat to the inner extinction, right? It's like it's a threat that leads to inner extinction. Dehumanization is a warning. Imagine in the future this technology came that was like, all right, human beings, you can become immortal, but you gotta become a robot. And imagine it's as if like you would see your cousins and like, or nephews, they had all become robots. I would put cyborgs in here too. Now let's talk about dehumanized minds, right? Those were examples. What would be an example of a dehumanized mind? An example of this would be pretty much the mind when it comes to the inner realms. It's like, let me see how I can give examples for this. Okay, let's say an example would be no longer civilized human behavior. People don't realize to be a human being is like you're tuning your attention to a sort of significant event in nature. So an example would be examples of dehumanization for the mind would be, one that comes to mind is oneness, okay? Let's say a yogi meditated and then the yogi attained oneness, and then the yogi was no longer a yogi because in oneness everything is being everything. So oneness technically is a dehumanized state of consciousness, an example of a dehumanized state of consciousness. So oneness would be a sort of, let's say, traditional word, a modern word would be collective mind. So a collective mind, let's say a computer in the future that a bunch of people's head are like plugged into the same mind server or something, I don't know. Like the future could be weird or it could be ingenious or what. So oneness is an example. Let's say a person in their inner realms, like they stop identifying, like I saw this bizarre video, guys, which I didn't know like how to extract meaning out of it, right? But I saw this video on YouTube where there was this like, 50-year-old man who had paid this like, I think it was like a film industry kind of cosmetic. He had paid this company to make like a suit that he looked exactly like a dog and he could behave like a dog. Okay? And so the guy, it was as if the people who were recording this video, they were like, this man has achieved his childhood dream. In his childhood, he wanted to be a dog, and now he's a, let's say, grown man, with like having a legit job and all of this stuff, and now he's just choosing to be a dog. Right? Like that's the way he thinks, like that soul wants to express itself. That moment of intelligence wants to express itself. And to me, that would be a person acting like a dog, for example, like in that video. A not saying it's good or bad, but it's kind of like it's liberating for someone to feel like they can be something in the inner realms, but not, I would say it's not, I mean, sure, there is a sort of liberation component to it, but it's as if the inner realms is behind your eyes. Any subject can be identified or accepted in the moment as a self. Somebody could have a sense of self where they're like, I'm a good human being, and somebody comes and says, you're not a good human being, you're worthless, you don't deserve to be alive or something. I had a teacher in grade 5, guys. She was a bit of like a psychopath when I think about, like, she had issues, right? And it's as if when a kid would get a wrong answer, she would say waste of oxygen, right? Imagine like a teacher saying, looking at a student and being like, you're a waste of oxygen. So another example of a dehumanized inner realms is like disassociation. An example of dehumanization in the dream state, dehumanization in the inner realms. Another example could be dreams, actually. The idea is, or how can I say it? So guys, I didn't have enough room there, but pretty much I wrote down an organism trying to be a subject can be considered as dehumanized activity. Okay, so dehumanization in the inner realms is when the attention is being in a way where it's considering, if it wasn't the body, what would it be? Do you know? And if the attention gets drawn more by that, it's like, you know, if like, okay, here, a dehumanized inner realms would be also like people becoming robots. Like that could totally lead to dehumanization. So that's it, guys. You know, there's the mind, there's the body, there's the world behind our eyes, there's the world in front of our eyes. In the world behind our eyes, enlightenment is a dehumanization, but there's nothing to fear behind your eyes, because whatever is truth is just being, right? That means it's like before any mistake, before any sin, truth was being truth. You know, before truth could not be truthful anymore. You know, that's the nature of the inconceivable. It is where conception is born out of. You know? Conception has a inconceivable source, you know, for its manifestation. Anyways, guys, too much writing. I'm gonna just talk. What can I say? Minds that were never just minds means this intelligence that is moving as the human species. It realizes it can see beyond its subjective experiential inner existence. It's another way of saying that we may not have found we may as a species not have found maybe, you know, what the mind is. We may not know the answer to that, but we know how to drive it. You know, we are like drivers in a vehicle that is unknown, and every step of life, you know, every step in the lifetime is like, you know, how we drove, how we piloted our attention in a void that could be anything ideological, right? Whether you believe in the flying spaghetti monster and the fractal symbolic meaning of the brain. Attention is divinity, guys. Attention is the miracle. We're like a miracle looking at, you know, a regular world and being like, hey man, where's the miracles? It's as if we're forgetting. We are the emissaries of the intelligence in this universal sector. All those beings that are in the human species, it's like find yourself honored by the cosmos. You know? The cosmos, in the future, I'll give it 3,600 years in my strategy called Mr.Within Civilization 2.0. Temporary beings. Like, just look at the human situation, guys. The body's like a temporary being just wanting to experience, like, you know, immortality, just continuity and infinity, right? And what is the mind? The mind already knows it's infinite, and it is trying to transcend infinity, right? The mind is a sort of like, what is evolution? The creature was like, okay, I want to see more. I want to get to the next moment, and eventually we realize it's like we're running on an infinite treadmill. It doesn't matter how fast we run, it doesn't matter even if we stop, right? The nature of reality should be treated as simulations, That means like maybe we're not like airbender level where like a person's, let's say, walking in the park and they suddenly feel like this immense inner light and they raise their hand in the air, and let's say there's a pond and all the water of the pond shapes like exactly their hand, like a giant hand made from the water, right? It's if we don't have airbender level like abilities, but behind our eyes we do. Behind our eyes, it's not the freedom of a human being we're experiencing. That means what is moving the human experience, it has defined itself, it has put on this mask, and we're like, human archetype, fuck yeah, So, but on some level, if we take that mask off, and that mask should not be taken off for, I would say, either ad infinitum or for 3,600 years, there's a choice. And that would be in some sense like post phase 3 of civilization 2.0. Guys, I'm telling you, it's like, I don't know how I'm coming across to the viewers, but I find myself just something if people want to know what truly motivates me is just this feeling that there is something magnificent here. Like it's what it is? It's like somebody playing chess, and they suddenly see it's like the chess pieces align, and so in some sense victory has become the last in some sense has been become a reality. So what I'm trying to tell you, it's like I'm seeing, and like what it is? It's as if like by the nature of everybody having a different DNA, my eyes saw a parallel universe of Earth. And in that parallel universe of Earth, the way the future happens, these chess pieces of historic events will take place, right? The idea is the liberation of an animal from a story into the ability of a multidimensional being, right? That means think of you thinking you're just a body, like, how comfortable, easy is that? Now think of the same comfort you have with being a mind, with being a body you have with being a mind. And then imagine in the future the same comfort they have with the mind. In some sense, it's as if like the body technically is another mind. Is like, okay, hear me out. The biological human body, like that's there's that, okay, and then there's the mind which is moving the human body, right? But then the mind to the soul is literally, how would I tell you? The mind to the soul is like another dimension. So the mind is the body of the soul, right? But the body is actually the one we're physically experiencing in conscious waking state. It's the body of the mind, right? But if the mind is the body of the soul, that means it's as if there's a soul, there's some intelligence here, and it has manifested itself. It's as if it's like everyone's not just had a visible life, they've also had an invisible life simultaneously. And if they don't believe me, one's memories that shape their future behavior testify to this. It's so remarkable that the human species has not considered freedom of the world first. It's like, imagine, somebody went up to Morpheus and Neo and was like, oh, nice guys, you freed your minds, great, now let's free the world. Let's free freedom, right? Like, because if we are truly in a free world, the concept of freedom wouldn't exist. That means a truly free being has no need to show freedom on some level. But if a being comes and sees that there's a sort of historic cultural development, right? To me, like as a kid, I really appreciated puzzles, but little did I know the conscious mystery of existence is the greatest puzzle. It is literally a wall the species hasn't climbed, and all the minds on the planet should be trying to get to the top of this wall, right? It's as if you know what it is. It's as if there are not it's like genius is an activation. It is when not only worlds have been bridged, but novelty is allowed to be its own pure entrance. You know, ultimately, if we had all our problems solved, the only thing that would be left would be to love causality. That means it's as if, like, look at what the human being could do. It could go into a sort of, like, imagine the whole species, like 8 billion human beings on a boat, and they fix the sink. Let's say they fix the holes on the ship. We shift the inefficient patterns in civilization and slowly tame, in some sense, kind of draw them towards efficiency. You see what it is? It's like, because we're alive once, the meaning of life could just be watching the original being, right? That means any movement in the outer realms, right? It's as if it's not the original being, because before the body moved, something else was moving. Now, when it comes to the mind and its unknown door, the unknown door of the mind is when the person realizes, no way, I was a human being believing in a sort of story of knowledge to the world. Then I realized beyond the human archetype, there is an unknown intelligence, right? It's strange. It's kind of like there's human minds, let's, give awards to human minds. But then there's like collective minds. There is, I would believe it or not, mind spaces. It's like, the person was like, the other day I was talking to the soul of the planet, and the planet was like, what's up? And the person was like, we're trying to build skyscrapers. But then there's a view where it's like this, imagine the person's talking to the soul of the planet, and suddenly, another voice comes, and it's the soul of the galaxy. And imagine the soul of the planet and the soul of the person listening to the soul of the galaxy, and suddenly the soul of the universe comes. And eventually the human psychology will see that we are all emanations of the central sun. That is why we are going forward. It's hilarious. Light from the sun has no other option than to go forward. And in some sense, when light enters the eyes of the human being, the evolution of consciousness and nature is just to go forward. It's as if the command that is the underlying urge and force behind us, the survival of the fittest. It is the sun's beams becoming a creature's attempt to in some sense just endlessly go forth. We are, pretty much what I'm saying is, the true nature of the human species. It's like the biological animal is acting like a light beam. Guys, I wrote this thing I write science fiction stories, and I wrote one called The Ocean Thief. Anyway, I just saw this scene. I was walking in the park, and I just saw this scene in my mind, okay, where imagine there's this cottage, and this very, let's say, what do you call it, divine young girl goes to by the street, by let's say the cottage that's beside like some, it's connected to the pond or whatever. And this kid sees like there's this person with a sort of like floating device in front of his hand, and all the oceans, it's as if a giant portal has opened, and all the water of the oceans is just being sucked into this portal, right? Imagine like a parallel universe where the oceans of human beings were being stolen or disappearing, right? It's hilarious. If we act inefficient, we in some sense deny ourselves, our future. But what I'm trying to say is that the light entered the eyes of a creature and the poetry of an infinite journey with you. You know, sometimes I fear, like I've had before I'll move on from the science fiction. But I'll say this, sometimes I have this feeling like, damn, you know, the species is leaving behind a lesser world. It's as if the future generations are slowly forgetting how to be nature, be with the presence of nature, right? It's as if a civilization can become a cubic cage, or a civilization can in some sense become, you know, a galactic stream connecting you to a universal river. Do you see? It's like there's a poetry to this. The future generations, they might be trapped in cyberspace in the future, right? When we look at the ethical global standard of the species, it's as if, you know, human beings are watching inefficiency without doing anything about it. And really what needs to happen is that, you know, they need to invite a philosopher to the United Nations. And so all the politicians are like, a philosopher, get this guy out of here, you know. And so the philosopher says, you guys are here to decide how the concepts in the world happen. And I am here to in some sense, tell you that you can also, there's a way for the whole species to reset its context to meaning. That means it would be the first time in history where there's this concept called the ethos. Ethos means like the story that moves the spirit of a phase in history, right? I guess to Mikhail Foucault, I don't know if I can draw clear parallels, but it's like he calls it episteme, you know. It's another way of saying kind of the soul mind of the age, right? And so I'm saying civilization 2.0, it's like as if like a human being talking about an advanced civilization in a species, right, is another way of saying for the first time the ethos is that the conditions, the natural laws of the universe set out for us, the human being can bypass it's the acceptance of the future it has right now. I don't know how to tell you this, but it's as if there's pretty much two ways that the world is changing. The way it changes in front of our eyes, it's pretty much, you know, the evolution of an animal, you know. And I would say, when you look at it from the inner realms, from the mind, it is the evolution of an unknown witness of various geometry of manifestation. You know, for me, I wondered in some sense, how can the soul be something beyond body and mind? And then I asked myself, what does the body have in common? What does the mind have in common? The body and mind have shape in common. They have, when I say shape in common, that means in imagination has shape and physical reality has shape. And so I asked myself, if there was a soul beyond the shape, you know, beyond the mind and body, it would pretty much be a soul beyond the shape. That means, imagine somebody said, I believe my soul, you know, was a king in my past life, and then somebody says, you know, it's as if you believe in the soul. You believe in the soul, you know, it's like an imposter. You know, the soul is there's no shape to believe. There's no story to attach. There is no character. That it's like divinity on a cultural level is the mindscape. Right now, the species, when it reaches the era of collective minds, it would be as if like before we built civilization, the species was experiencing its body, you built civilization, now it's experiencing its mind. And imagine when the era of collective mind comes, when intelligence is actually not made of matter, but made of space. You know? It's as if, like, what is powering empty space? What is powering space? And you see, it's as if space is the original source of where the matter is. It's as if, you know what it is? Space is an invisible power. And this invisible power, if you see it has a mind, then religion makes sense. If you don't see it has a mind, then you are left in some sense to becoming your own archer, you know, putting the bow and then pulling the arrow, and in some sense you have attempted your greatest vision. You know, it's another way of saying, like, what is the meaning of everything that is happening? And the answer is, in some sense, to see where it goes, because the world is moving. It's remarkable, you know. Some people dance in the world, and for some, let's say, philosophers and mystics, the world dances, or novelists, the world dances behind their eyes. Right? I have had, the moment I realized this concept-context relationship, guys, this is the secret to understanding anything, anywhere, anytime, in any realm. This is the secret here. I'll bring the note back. Okay. This is, I would say, the secret. Imagine Mr.Within's secret to understanding anything. So, this is the secret to understanding that I have maybe not the best handwriting. The secret to understanding anything, anywhere, at any time, in first point, the nature of visible or observable manifestation is dual. In other words, duality. That's a point to keep in mind. And so, the nature of observable manifestation is duality, and duality leads to self. So the secret to understanding anything, anywhere, at any time is to see what you have in the moment or are left with. I think my handwriting is unreadable. But anyways. You know, honestly, what I'm trying to say is that the moment there's consciousness, the consciousness is conditional to form. The moment there is shape and space, a relationship can occur inside the space, inside the shape. And so really the secret is pretty much eyes open in a world, and how is this world being compartmentalized? And I think one of the most universal methods is this concept context. You know, it's like, just like imagine somebody putting a, better lens on their telescope. So now imagine a human being looking through this notion, okay, what is the immediate concept value in the moment, and what is the contextual value of the moment? A person could be like, the conceptual value is survive in the fittest way, every man for himself, or you could say in the contextual value, it's the development of a better system, collective system. Pretty much the idea is, if the human mind can fathom a greater possibility, it's as if something in nature has allowed that ideal to have some sort of energetic value. It's kind of very poetic, right? It's as if this, they never say this. They say human beings believe in ideas, but they never say ideas believe in human beings. As if, like, the same time human beings are trying to get to the next phase of their evolution, at the same time ideas from ancient times are fighting for their continuity into the future. I called it the language wars in previous episodes, but really what duality is pretty much like, are we really choosing to be symbols on paper, or is there something way more mysterious and advanced going on this whole time? Could it be that our beliefs have become bunkers of comfort, but in some sense we have not stepped out to see where the true value of the moment is, where the true like for example, imagine you're a general in a battlefield and you're the general of one kingdom, and there's another person who's a general of another kingdom, and two generals are fighting, and the general is wondering which position on the battlefield needs to, in some sense, have greater strength. So what the general would do is the general would try to find the weakest part of the system and immediately bestow it with the greatest strength. Like imagine, we have the sci-fi context of like an army of immortal soldiers or immortal warriors. Imagine an immortal warrior army. Imagine we all decided to be warriors and we lived till, I don't know, like millions and millions of years, and the human beings were everywhere acting like they're warriors and immortal warriors, right? Imagine immortality became a thing, you know? I'm pretty sure that conversation would happen one day when somebody's feeling like, hey man, how was your day? And the person is like, not bad man, I became an immortal finally. And the person, and imagine the friend's like, what do you mean? It's like, hey man, have you ever wondered if you can never die? Oh man. Our eyes open, our eyes close, our eyes open, our eyes close. The sun, in some sense, you know, it's like the earth, it's like darkness, light, you know. It's like we're honestly creatures that are tripping. We're like literally creatures that are overwhelmed by the information that our existence is being and has to be for us to be. Right? Like right now, you know, I'm just thinking like the mind is an idea, right? And on a let's say a very realist perspective, the mind is an activity. And pretty much like, you know, the one asking the question is as mysterious as the one that's the answer you can get. It's gonna dehumanize phases in culture will come, right? An example would be when clones become real, when androids become real, imagine aliens become real, right? I've written the sci-fi novel where in it, in the future, it's like that and more. Imagine our earliest ancestors, we go back in a time machine before they had even known what glass was, and we give them like a, you know, glass bottle, you know, bottle of water, right? Carbonated water, and they feel like, you know, it becomes like a spiritual experience. So. Freedom, but we don't know what it is. We all want truth, but we don't know what it is. We all want success, but we don't know what it is. We all want greatness, but we don't know what it is. And it's simply because manifestation is like a live stream. You know, it's just like we are that part of the universe that decided to fly beyond its own birthplace, right? Like the bird leaving a nest, the human species becoming interstellar. The human mind has an incredible capability of perception, and the way it holds this perception renders truth as whether it's fiction or non-fiction. You see, there's some people who are like, man, you know, it's like, let's have anarchy, let chaos, you know, run things. And some people are like, no, you know, let's be decent and good and kind human beings, let have order run things, right? But it's as if there's a state that is just watching these two, right? Imagine a person like, you know, imagine back in the day you were some like villager kid in China, and you had gone late at night to get water from a well, and you looked at the sky and you saw there was like this black dragon and this white dragon spiraling around each other, in some sense, just endlessly flying towards the sky. Chaos and order was the karma of our ancestors. The karma of future humanity is way more multidimensional. Multidimensionality means that any object has more greater dimensions, and any subject, has greater dimensions or is being viewed from a greater dimension. I mean, what can I say, guys? I mean, poetry is really when you reach the unknown, you're like, okay, the reset has occurred. There's some days where I feel like, maybe I'm in some tiny percentage, I am, contributing to this vision of the advanced civilization. I don't know. Who knows? Sometimes I feel like eventually, just like I'm live streaming this talk, the nature of physical existence on a planet is that in some sense karma will live stream my life until the last moment, right? And believe it or not, guys, I've sometimes wondered what my last moment of manifestation would be. What would be the last thing I see before the eyes, in some sense, are honorably, saluted for their service. Not just the eyes, just like the moment of death is when the body is like, see you later. I'm gonna go become the periodic table, meaningless matter moving in the cosmos. It's as if the person, I don't know how people have a view on health, but for me, I wouldn't say like I'm the physically healthiest person, but I would say that to me, an attitude approach to life where you're considering a living universe, it's as if the wonder of what is beyond the logic of your expectations logic, right? When one confronts the unknown, it's very strange. It's as if a part of you has never been born, and because it has never been born, it can never die. That's another way of accessing, I would say, a sort of inner immortality equals eternity. I just want to see a species not acting like a reactive, unconscious, bewildered beast, but a species that is acting like a conscious, fascinated, advancement of nature. That's the advanced civilization is something that the moment human beings pull off, they get it to that level. Like, right now, it's like all that we can do in 2022 is be gardeners of the decency of the natural world. It's as if, the person was like, okay, how do I, let's say I'm going to have, the person was like, okay. Imagine a person thinking I'm going to have grandkids one day, and then the person's like, what's the best gift I could give to my unborn grandkids, right? And then the person realized, what's the greatest gift you can give to your greatest grandchildren? And the idea is like when you give a gift to that, when you honor the future and you realize like we're left with the future, the past is past and the present has nowhere to go, and the future is the possibility of how from a singular truth worlds emerged, each dancing in their own way, And so it was as if the human being thought it was on the shoulder of giants, and then it realized it was the sight of them. That means the person's like, wait a minute, you're telling me in a monotheistic tradition God is watching me, so technically that means God has to be here to watch me, right? It's as if the person's like, if God is watching me, then I am being watched by God. So it's another way of saying the person doesn't know what the truth is, but the truth is accessible, you know. In Mahayana Buddhism, they have this concept of the Pure Lands, and evidently there was this Buddhic figure who managed to create a dimension for enlightened beings to take rest, right? They called it the Pure Lands. It's like you're walking into your original nature. That means imagine human beings are like the fragmented psyche of a species that hasn't understood its own greater value. And so when the fragmented psyche is unified under a grander purpose, it's as if the person's like, instead of going from how do I serve myself, how do I serve others, how do I serve the world, the person goes from how do I serve the world, then how do I serve others, then how do I serve myself, right? I would say this is the efficiency, that it's as if our greatness is not even individual. It's as if maybe today we have, great people, but in the future it would be a great species. And it's as if the person sees a beautiful, let's say, sunset, and then they wonder, where is the beauty though? Is the beauty because of how my mind is holding the moment, or is the sunset beautiful just because of what it is? There's many ways to access a realization that your sight is being watched in an unknown way by that which you're calling you. And it's another way of saying, like any person that has a sense of subjective self, that sense of subjective self is hovering in the attention of an unchangeable witnessing force. That unchangeable witnessing force doesn't need to be, given personality. It's as if before the human being needed to talk to angels, aliens, time travelers, or or let's say animals or plants or whatever. Before the person needed to rely on that which is not an original energetic source. The nature of the human mind when it comes to creativity, that it is actually starting from an absolutist perspective. You guys, it's so bizarre, but people don't realize it. If a person doesn't associate with thinking that they're a thought or a sense of self or an ego, and for a moment they just treat it that what is passing by through the moment. Sri Ramana Maharshi says, let what comes come, let what goes goes, see what remains. That which is seeing what remains is not a subject. So it's as if because we're aware that there are subjects, we are not a subject. It's as if a thought is not thinking of other thoughts. There is an awareness that holds an initial reference point in the void, and from that it stems out the philosophy of that. As consciousness arrived in the resurrecting phoenix's eyes. On this planet, human beings have realized there's pretty much two approaches to life. You either trust it or distrust it, and if you trust life, then you become a cultivator, you cultivate love. But if a person distrusts life, you cultivate exploration. Imagine truth was a bunch of people in a restaurant being like, what's the best food here in this restaurant? What's the best meal, right? And everybody had a different taste. It's like everybody, their truth was a sort of, the belonging of their eyes for meaning. unknown viewer, flowing like an invisible wind of attention through a visible wall. When it comes to considering ourselves as a mind, the mind is a sort of freedom. That's its true identity. The mind is a bridge between how objects require for there to be even the questioning of greater dimensions. It's like this egg, which came first, the chicken or the egg, but it's happening for space and matter. It's like which came first, space or matter? Or in modern cultural sense, which came first, truth or illusion? What is the initial causal value of this one system of understanding? When eyes open to reality, it's another way of saying the person is coordinating their attention towards the unreal. And you know what's I would say incredible is that the brain, here I'll read something for the viewers. So you can say that if we were to divide the functions of the human brain, so guys, listen to this part. Pretty much like, imagine if the brain was turned into quadrants, okay? And in some sense, each quadrant was assigned to a sort of expression of the human activity. So pretty much you can say if the brain was a kingdom, was like a sort of, it's as if like, what are the kingdoms that are constituting the brain? So it's as if there's the kingdom of the frontal lobe, The frontal lobe is associated to intelligence, problem solving, reading, speaking, language, sensation. So guys, I didn't know that when viewers like my videos, it's actually, my frontal lobe is engaging. So there's the kingdom of the frontal lobe as a sort of quadrant of the brain. There is the let me see if I can pronounce this. There's the Periantal Lobe. The Periantal Lobe, so the frontal lobe is kind of like in front of the brain. The Periantal Lobe is like the back of your head, like from your scalp to, let's say, like middle of your head, right? So the Periantal Lobe, it's there, like this part of the brain seems to be, focused on body orientation, reading, sensation, knowing right and left. So the Periantal Lobe is the dualistic engine of human perception. But of course the brain is happening as one brain, like even though it's the same with the human body. We give names to different body parts, but it's one body happening at the same time. So from the frontal lobe kingdom, let's associate that to problem solving or language. So the frontal lobe kingdom salutes language. The Periantal Lobe kingdom salutes body orientation or knowing right and left. The duality of body orientation. Then we have the Temporal Lobe. The kingdom of the Temporal Lobe. And the Temporal Lobe is kind of like, if it's like where the stem of where the spinal cord connects to, it's like the gate for the spinal cord to the rest of the brain. So the temporal kingdom, okay, the temporal lobe kingdom. And so the temporal lobe kingdom, part of the brain is associated to behavior, intelligence, memory, movement, hearing. So who knew when viewers are listening to these talks, it's actually like, the temporal lobe is like, the true speaker. There's the kingdom of the occipital lobe, and the occipital lobe, OCCIPITAL. This kingdom, in some sense, it values vision, color perception. So it's the back of your head, the lower back of your brain, where it's associated to color and vision. Hence why people say it's important to have like helmets. Right? Then there's the kingdom of the cerebellum, balance, coordination, muscle control. And then there's the kingdom of the spinal cord, body temperature, digestion, swallowing, sleep, breathing. I don't know what that means, but anyways, some kind of saying that. Okay, anyways. Oh, sorry guys, I think it's not breathing. I think this is a typo. I think it's supposed to be breathing. Or I don't know, maybe not breathing. I'm trying to think which category the breathing would like. Technically, it's like, I don't know how the oxygen particles are being divided between these quadrants of the brain, right? So when somebody inhales oxygen, it's like to which quadrant of the brain is the oxygen going? So guys, these are the different parts of the brain, and what's even more fascinating is that years of evolution it took for these parts of the brain to appear. They weren't all at once, you know. And there's also epistemological factors, right? Or I should maybe a way I should say it, it's like culture, like factors outside of the biological system that influence the biological system, and all the factors inside the biological system working at once to be the biological system. I think that, let's say a person, you know, let's say somebody said, Mr.Within, you know, what's a great way to go towards spirituality or approach spirituality? I would tell you that, okay, sure, let's say there's an enlightenment, okay, the way I would suggest to approach it a person needs to be honest, and all they need to do is go buy a notebook and have access to a park or something in nature, okay, and find some moment throughout the day where you can go. One of the best places to go is like by a stream or a lake or something, you know, when like a river has a sort of, its movement kind of animates it a bit, you know. It's like it's not hard to see how a river could be seen to have a soul, you know, because it has animation in its direction. It's like it's hilarious, guys, you know. It's as if like we can talk about freedom all we want, but at the end of it, freedom is a quality of being. It's not like when it comes to the mind. If the freedom of the mind is not instantaneous, there is no enlightenment. That means honestly a person knows, you know, deep down I think everybody knows how they have held the context to their own character. And really just imagine what it would be like, what kind of a world it would be, where we had advanced civilization in front of our eyes, and we had advanced communication behind our eyes. And we had somehow managed to, it's as if the human being is going through a tough time. Civilization 1.0 is kind of like, learning from its mistakes, but the reason these mistakes or failures happen for Civilization 1.0 is because in some sense it did not choose to update. Any system that doesn't update has to, in some sense, work in its limitations. I feel like I should go into a cold tunnel. Alright guys, I'm going to go into a cold tunnel of Aristotle quotes. Aristotle says quality is not an act, it is a habit. Aristotle says love is composed of a single soul inhabiting two bodies. Quite interestingly, the poet Rumi says something similar. Aristotle says the aim of art is to represent not the outward appearance of things, but their inward significance. Aristotle says in all things of nature there is something of the marvelous. Aristotle says it's the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting. Aristotle says in all things of nature there is something of the marvelous. Aristotle says the worst form of inequality is to try to make unequal things equal. Aristotle says there is no great genius without some touch of madness. Aristotle says pleasure in the job puts perfection in the work. Aristotle says hope is a waking dream. Aristotle says the roots of education are bitter, but the fruit is sweet. Aristotle says happiness depends on ourselves. Aristotle says at his best man is the noblest of all animals. Separated from law and justice, he is the worst. Aristotle says the energy of the mind is the essence of life. That sentence is so excellent. The energy of the mind is the essence of life, yeah. And it's like dehumanization would be kind of saying this energy that is being consciousness have a personality. And to be honest, personality is a human trait ascribed to something that perhaps it's like, it's like, let's say you give a teddy bear to a child, or let's say you give an action figure to a child, and somebody's like, is that object humanized or dehumanized? You would see at its essence, on an elemental level, it's dehumanized, but on a cultural level, it's humanized. For example, when it comes to reality, it's humanized. And science fiction, all this stuff, all the probabilities of the human archetype. Imagination is being considered as dehumanized. Aristotle says the ultimate value of life depends upon the awareness and the power of contemplation rather than upon mere survival. Yeah, Aristotle's saying pretty much if you survived, now contemplate, like, what is this event of the cosmos that we're all in, like what's going on, when will the future generations, when will the future generations realize the true value of their future generations? It's as if, imagine human beings in 2022 heard the songs of the advanced civilization, and in some sense as if like we acted not just one step ahead, 2 steps ahead, but it's as if the future generations will look back at human beings in 2022 and be like, how far-reaching were our ancestors? They were trying to, in some sense, go as far as they can, and then pass the torch of whatever civilization we've left for them. Right? It's as if so many people preach love, but if you love your world, you have to love its future. It comes with it. Aristotle says personal beauty is a greater recommendation than any letter of reference. Aristotle says the aim of the wise is not to secure pleasure, but to avoid pain. Aristotle says, I count him braver who overcomes his desires than him who conquers his enemies, for the hardest victory is over self. Aristotle says, well begun is half done. Aristotle says he who is unable to live in society, or who has no need because he is sufficient for himself, must either be a beast or a god. That's the thing, guys. Dehumanized states can lead to there. Like the idea of not just seeing an action figure that's shaped like the human archetype, but imagine in Vedic culture they saw demigods. In Greek mythology, there were gods walking in the clouds, and somebody should say, okay, is let's say God shaped like a human or a god, right? Is it humanized or is it dehumanized? And you see, by the nature of being a god, it's as if its causal position is dehumanized. The causal position for being a human being is like we start off being like a person. It's like we're pretty much like, imagine like in the future the greatest rapper of all time is born, and like the doctor and the nurses, are fascinated because the way the child cried had rhythm. Okay, Aristotle says you will never do anything in this world without courage. It is the greatest quality of the mind, next to honor. Aristotle says the law is reason free from passion. Aristotle says suffering becomes beautiful when anyone bears great calamities with cheerfulness, not through insensibility, but through greatness of mind. Aristotle says jealousy is both reasonable and belongs to reasonable men, while envy is base and belongs to the base. For the one makes himself get good things by jealousy, while the other does not allow his neighbor to have them through envy. Wow. Alright guys, last quote. Those that know do, those that understand teach. Yeah. It's another way of saying there's way more to know. It's as if, alright, Aristotle, I'll get back to knowing that infinity works. Honestly, guys, the unknown is one of the most beautiful states of being. I don't know how to tell you. It is like a state of being where there's unconditional freedom, meaning that there's no subject-object orientation or object-subject orientation. It's pretty much like it's living in the potential dimension of manifestation, where anything in that potential dimension is possible. Plato spoke about the world of forms as if a dimension where it's all just pure geometry, everything that's happening, right? The same way we can say a person is made of atoms, we can say a person is made of shapes. Aristotle says the secret to humor, Aristotle says the secret to humor is surprise. Aristotle says the soul never thinks without a picture. Aristotle says a great city is not to be confounded with a populous one. Aristotle says mothers are fonder than fathers of their children because they are more certain they are their own. Aristotle says education is an ornament in prosperity and a refuge in adversity. Aristotle says my best friend is the man who is wishing me well, wishes it for my sake. Aristotle says change in all things is sweet. Aristotle says it is just that we should be grateful not only to those with whose views we may agree, but also to those who have expressed more superficial views, for these also contributed something by developing before us the powers of thought. That means rather than saying imagination doesn't exist, it's like, wow, look at this, mysterious, interdimensional work of art. Aristotle says, wishing to be friends is quick work, but friendship is a slow ripening fruit. Aristotle says the one exclusive sign of thorough knowledge is the power of teaching. Aristotle says moral excellence comes about as a result of habit. We become just by doing just acts, temperate by doing temperate acts, brave by doing brave acts. Aristotle says the state comes into existence for the sake of life and continues to exist for the sake of good life. Aristotle says fear is pain arising from the anticipation of evil. Aristotle says all human actions have more of these 7 causes: chance, nature, compulsions, habits, reason, passion, desire. Look at this. I gotta dedicate an episode to Aristotle now. Like, this is Aristotle's, like, you know, guys, Aristotle is strangely like he's like, if I'd be surprised if an alien came down in the future. Imagine there's extraterrestrial contact, and everything the extraterrestrial contact said were like, yo, Aristotle had said that already. And the alien's like, well, okay, guys, I'm still an alien. Guys, imagine, like, there's the inner realms. It's like sometimes I get multiple thoughts, like when a person speaks they can only share one thought, but there's moments where I get like a bunch of thoughts in synchronization at the same time. So imagine a person like talking and suddenly behind their eyes they see 5 probabilities of how that sentence can go, you know. It's as if three inner events, and it's based off of freedom. Like, I've personally reached the point where through geometry I have liberated, I would say what people back in the day would call the third eye, but I would say not a third eye, I would say a third sight. The mind is technically acting like a third eye. Imagination is acting like a third eye. You know, imagination is technically like something is seeing it. Like, can you see what I'm saying, guys? Whoever you are listening to me, just try this out for a second, right? I want you to look at something in front of you, something on the table or whatever, and just look at it, okay? Like, just concentrate on it and look at it. Like, for example, I'm looking at my laptop, okay? Now, close your eyes and try to still see your laptop. And if you can see your laptop, there is no light entering your eyes, but you can still see. You can still see when you close your eyes. That's the third eye. That's the third, technically, the third sight. Okay? And I call it the inner realms, you know, because there's way more to it than just like an actual sphere. Anyways, guys, it's super windy. I'm gonna end this episode. Thanks for listening. Go buy a notebook, go in nature, and just sit there watching how be fascinated, you know, to unravel the secrets of your own mind. It's like the part of it's like why we have evolved beyond physiological desires. We go towards psychological desires. Beyond psychological desires, we go in some sense to universal desires, and universal desires are dehumanized. There's so much going on here, and every person is like a unique antenna, and the world is not just waiting. You know, it's like people are thinking, so every person on the planet, I have a prediction, in an advanced civilization, everybody would be an advanced communicator, meaning that everybody would be a writer. Everybody. And there would be a library of great names, right? The library of names, right? Where it's like every person's name is there, and all the books they've written are also there. The idea is that the purpose of a book is to bring something from your inner realms into your outer realms. When I tell you get a notebook and go in nature, what I'm trying to tell you is like, alright, for a moment, put a pause on your belief system or whatever, and just watch. Just watch the simplicity of nature. Start from the observation of the simple, and be so content in noticing simple things that eventually you'll see you automatically notice complex things. And so what happens is that when the body is still, like, it's as if, like, imagine a person's walking and they sit down, the mind is still walking. You know, the mind can still continue walking. right? So the mind, the person begins to notice the influence of their mind, right? And it's kind of cool because it's as if like meeting your unknown self, but you meet it experientially directly when the known self is no longer an object subject, a bird in a cage. A species opened its eyes, saw an infinite universe, and was like, alright, time to enjoy infinity. That means imagine like a civilization of true beings, like the true civilization. This would be the legend for the advanced civilization. That means when let's say civilization reaches, okay, let's classify it like this. Let's say civilization, just for the sake of speech, is 50%, the result of efficient systems, and 50% the result of inefficient. So efficient and inefficient, 50-50. Okay, now if we go towards extinction and the world becomes a messed up place, it's like the ratio, the percentage of inefficiency is increasing and efficiency is becoming less. Now I'm saying an advanced civilization happens when the species goes beyond, I would say 50%, beyond the contentment of just 50% efficiency. It's as if like, you know what it is? It's as if like the nostalgia of an advanced intelligence, right, is inspiring in some sense the temporary to open the eternal eyes. The mystery of the realm is beyond thought, and this is why like writing is remarkable, because it's as if you are not the subjects. It's like films are turning into words, and every person has their, I would say, it's like you'll see it when you experience it, but there is a majesty to how every mind is simply happening, and in this most simple state, peace dwells. So the more peaceful and efficient civilization is, the more advanced the human experience is, right? It's as if we are living at a time where we are not just an object. We are the destiny of the mystery of a collective field society. We are technically, like imagine a human being sent astronauts into space and a universal field of intelligence incarnated on Earth. An invisible field of activity, let's say, brought forth a sort of particular moment of manifestation. So, I guess one final sum up, the two types of dehumanization for the human species are pretty much dehumanization in the inner realms and outer realms. In the outer realms, if the biological nature is not protected and is not vacuumed in by the future technological cube, it's as if the battle of nature and technology is not happening in the outer realms, it's happening in the inner realms. And if the mind of a natural organism is defeated and put into the submission of a sort of repetitive process, like how can I tell you? It's like imagination is how we know that life is beyond cycles. Perhaps for the first time in history, a human being is requesting that a species returns to the humility and the fascination, as if you have arrived in an unknown world, and your own ability to yourself is also unknown. nobody should fear the unknown. And nobody should fear the known. And the ability of the mind to understand means that in any situation can be viewed from outside of it. The mind has an ability not to just simulate reality accurately, but it has an ability to receive accurate, it has an ability to simulate after receiving, I don't know how to say it, it's like, the mind is like, imagine it's like a sort of, okay, just for the sake of speech I'll say, imagine the mind is a black hole and it is pulling sensory information and conception into it. So imagine the emptiness of the human mind is a black hole. The emptiness that encapsulates the individual human mind. Imagine it's a black hole that's pulling everything into it. And so all senses are being pulled, and then they are in some sense arriving. It's as if like, where are the senses going? They're all going to how the whole moment is being, and then awareness is the whole moment in accordance to what is the most recent signal behaves. We're reaching a time where human beings not only should love and honor for their future, not only should the concept of the future just feel like, as if we are building paradise on earth. And paradise is not just, let's say a story in a book. Paradise is the inconceivable ever advancement of the life of this universal cycle. That means it's as if I think, I don't know, but I think if before I pass away in this world, like if before I transition in this world, I feel that it's as if before the person could die, they stepped out of the world. Attention, before they could die in a world, they stepped out of it. It's another way of saying that, like, freedom of the recognition that a field of activity is moving the particle means the belief system of the particle is not, it's as if we have an inner universe and the outer universe. The outer universe is way more stable than the inner universe, but the inner universe has access to ways of the outer universe moving that only, it's like we can applaud imagination for. Minds that were never just minds is a suggestion. That which is looking through the eyes of a creature in a changing world, the way it can know it is changing, it must have the codependent notion of the changeless. It's as if before we can truly, as conceptually and philosophically, be a temporary being, we need to first know what an eternal being is. It's like without the idea of the temporary, what does the eternal mean? And without the idea of the eternal, what does the temporary mean? And nothing can't be an answer because nothing is the paper where the question is written on. Every person's eyes is a gift of the universe to be able to see in a way that nobody else can. We are all gifted in how our attention, has entered this world. There was a time where I was like, man, am I gonna, complete my life purpose? I would think that way. And then I realized existentially, just by existing, a person's life purpose is just complete. experientially, it's like, what can we do with the existence accessible? Pretty much imagine an advanced civilization is made by, like, imagine a group of great pilots. But these pilots are not pilots that are piloting the outer realms. They're piloting the inner realms of mankind. It's another way of saying, like, pilots take people from one destination to another, and the pilots of the inner realms of mankind would be as if these pilots are trying to take the attention of the species. It's like, in one manner you're piloting an airplane, in another manner you're piloting how the attention is holding the plane of existence. The mysteries of the soul cannot be forgotten when the concept is existing. There's a story, guys, I'll tell you. There's a man, and he sees this enlightened person, this enlightened guru meditating one morning when he's going to work, and he goes to the person and says, "Hey, enlightened guru, you know, I'm a busy man, just what is enlightenment? Just tell me, you know." And then the enlightened guru sees this guy is sincere. So he goes into a meditative mode, as if the antenna's picking up an omnipresent signal or something. You know, guys, this is a bit on a tangent, but imagination is semi-made with light. So imagination is as real as light is being an image, and then there being an ability of the mind to move an image. But anyways, this guy, the enlightened guru, looks at this guy and he says, "You have to take 500 of my cows into the forest, and when they're like 1,000, you have to come back, and then I will tell you exactly what it is." And this guy's like, "Man, you know, I'm selling tomatoes in the market. This guy's telling me to go take care of his 500 cows. Like, how does he trust me even with the cows? Maybe this guy's actually legit. Maybe this is some sort of destiny moment or something." And so this guy quits his job, you know, as a tomato salesman, and people are like, "Man, don't do it. Tomatoes are the new thing. Everybody loves tomatoes." You know, and the guy's like, "Man, I'm trying to get enlightened. Let's see where that goes." And so this guy quits his tomato job. And decides to take the cows and goes to this spot where the guru tells him to go, and he takes all the cows, and there's like a cottage. There isn't a cottage, let's say, there's just a field or someplace. Or let's say there is a cottage, you know, or somewhere. He goes somewhere in the mountains, right, with all the cows. And he sits there, and imagine, and by the way, guys, the concept of the cow has attribution to a sort of deity position, as if, like, you know, as if avatars of God had manifested their behaviors through, let's say, behaviors of cows, you know. And people are in the West, and they are probably going to be like, "I didn't know beef was so divine," you know. But I'll tell you, the world just needs to advance to a point where we don't need to harm other life forms to advance, you know. This guy goes into the mountains. He's alone. He's in his solitude. He sits there every day counting the cows, just waiting for these cows to become 1,000. And he's like, man, that's so long. And eventually he's there so long that he stops counting the cows and he just looks around. And he begins to notice how magnificent, like imagine somebody sitting in a forest with like 500 cows and this guy's just watching everything and he feels like this is like look at how much life is moving in the forest, And he eventually sits there so long that he forgets how to count. He forgets how to speak. For a second, he's just absorbed in this pure silence of happening alongside all that is nature. And so, he's not even, the concept of time is in some sense dissolved into just how nature moves. And this guy is there, and it feels like an eternity, and it feels as if he's with the world rather than in it or against it. And so after some point, one of the cows walks up to this guy and he's like, hey man, we're 1,000 cows, let's go back. It's like, the enlightened whose farm doesn't have more space. And so this guy's like, oh my God, suddenly he remembers how to speak, right? He steps out of that Satchit Ananda, conscious existence's bliss moment. And he, in some sense, remembers how to speak, and then suddenly he looks at the cows and he remembers how to count, and he remembers why he's there, and now he has to go back, but he doesn't remember the way to go back, right back to the village where the enlightened guru is. And so what he does is, in some sense, because he's been present with nature gracefully for so long, that it's as if when he's going to figure out a way to go back, the birds and the wind, tell him where to go. Do you know what that means? That means where the wind would blow, it would be as if the soul of the moment is pointing that way. Imagine you're walking in the park and you're lost somewhere and you don't know which direction you need to go, and suddenly a bird flies from above your head and flies straight forward. And you suddenly feel like, okay, I should go straight forward. So this guy, the wind, he pretty much the voice of, nature speaks to him. Nature has become his ally as he has become an ally of nature. And so he goes back, and kind of Gandalf from Lord of the Rings too. At the end when Gandalf arrives, the enlightened guru sees this guy at top of the hill, and the cows are so enlightened that they just automatically go into the farm. Right? This guy just goes straight talking. And he tells the guru, here, your cows are 1,000. Tell me, what is the secret of enlightenment? And the guru looks at him and sees that his eyes have been blissed out. His eyes have been blissed out because for a moment he experienced a dehumanized natural collectivity, which is man being, in some sense, allowing the ecosystem, having faith in the ecosystem. Right? It was as if the shift in human consciousness from just an animal in a jungle was pretty much we're like, okay, let's do something else. That let's do something else was the beginning of the subjective evolution. Not the beginning, but a transition point from the subjective evolution. The beginning of the subjective evolution is when the evolutionary animal notices shadow or reflection or looked at its limbs, and suddenly, bit by bit, a sort of separation of self and world occurred. That's it. But the subjective evolution is pretty much the history of imagination, how it has happened so far. It's on some level, seeing ourselves as antennas, I think that's the most incredible, ingenious, secular way of going about it, right? As if we're and all teachers, all truth speakers in the world have to be like, all right, guys, we're telling you our truths, but keep in mind it's an unknown universe. It's like in the honor of an unknown universe. The creative vision of a species retaliated against the void. You see, we are the greatest performance, in emptiness. We are poetically the last stand of a civilization that is active on this planet. And if we live efficiently, not only do we solve the problems instantly, but we begin having global problems. Like in some sense, I would say not global. Like it's if after we've solved global problems, we're thinking of galactic problems, interstellar problems. Do you see what I'm saying? It's as if there will come a time where the sky will become our home as much as the ground is. It's not that, there's beautiful things in the world. Beauty is everywhere. Beauty is what's looking, seeing that, let's say divinely aligned geometry, What really I think love is how honesty lives for the moment's truth. That means it's as if we don't just care for our inner realms or ourselves. We don't just care for our species. It's like we don't just smoothly and efficiently enter the global phase of human psychology. But in some sense, it's as if like the human species has gone into a pattern where the mysteries of the world are so great and mighty that in order to uncover them, the mightiest education system, the mightiest strategy must be implemented. And for me, I would say as a person who felt he was lost in the void, I would say to you that the advanced civilization is the most, it's like the divinity of the non-story mind, like beyond, like how can I tell you right now all I can do is talk about an advanced civilization, even though in my inner realms I'm seeing possibilities of it, but it's only in the future of the outer realms that they will experience it, right? So all that we can do is share all of our, it's like in 2020 the whole species did something genius, and it started properly organizing and researching all the let's say honest and original information it had on it. What I'm trying to tell you is that the ego releases itself from language, and then the true witness is always with it. The greatest kind of freedom, to be free before you can, you cannot. It's like it's like they ask the person, are you enlightened? He's like, buddy, before I was born, I was enlightened. What are you talking about? I was the light that in some sense, manifestation, let's say, spun in, right? And the person's like, okay, bro, okay, did too much. Guys, everything is a narrative. Who knew? We're all masquerading as stories, and we don't know what the mind is. And it's as if like an actor realizing behind its eyes it's the director of the film, in front of its eyes it is the actor of the film. Do you see what I'm saying? The unchangeable inner witness, all that the ultimate can do is in some sense just extend forth the ultimate. It's another way of saying truth never went anywhere. Much blessings, guys. Thanks for bearing through this episode. It was perhaps a turbulent one, but I feel important, inner geometry was expressed.